launch of this wonderful book. It's been much anticipated. David Slack, the writer, came in yesterday and he looked at it and he said, we need more of these books that just are, first-hand encounters of these two races. So thank you for that, Grant. I'm just here to welcome you and say thank you for coming in, to pass you on to the rest, and a little bit of housekeeping, which we have to do because we live in Wellington in the case of a fire or an earthquake. Well, actually not the earthquake. Earthquake, you have to stay here, which is earthquake strengthened, but the books aren't, so feel free to help yourself. If it's a fire, head out those doors and to, is it Mercer Street, Lisa? Yeah, Mercer Street. Anyway, may we have a round of applause for Grant Hodge, and Roger Steele will be introducing.
Tēnā koe te tuhine ngari, tēnā koutou katoa, ko tai mai nei tēnei pōki te whakanui, tēnei hui. Mara hara mai nau mai ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. I'm Roger Steele and I'm not the publisher of this book, but I'm very good friends both with the publisher, who's Lynn Pegg, who's sick tonight, and with the author, Grant Hodson. Well, I'm not sure if we'll still be such good friends if he asks me to get involved in another book, but we'll see. He and Lynn have certainly done a beautiful job with this book, and as we say in our country, ko iti he pounamu. It may be small, but it is a treasure. It is a treasure. So my job tonight is just to introduce the speakers, and so it's my mixed pleasure, but nonetheless very considerable honour has been bestowed on this book that no less than the Honourable Shane Jones has agreed to launch it tonight. So I'll ask Shane to come forward and launch the book officially. It's as I say, it's a mixed pleasure. Shane and I go back a long way when he was a fine young man with a lot of promise. Up in the north, a lot of promise and not so many complications. It's shared in his life ever since. So I have to say that normally I've launched, as a publisher myself, I've launched 600 or 700 books, and I've agreed with almost everything in all of them. Tonight, I agree with much of what's in this book. And some of Shane's policies, well, I don't know, Shane. We'll have to have a talk about that at some future time. I noticed it was Shane's birthday yesterday, so just be kind to the man. He's still in the glow. And Grant referred me to a Facebook posting whereby he was very proudly showing off his birthday present. It was a skill saw. And he was very possessive about that skill saw. But I want you to know, Shane, it was not a jackhammer. It was not a mining drill. It was a skill saw to keep you at home and doing home repairs. I couldn't think of a nice thing to say about the New Zealand First Party in the last year or two, so because I'm hardly unbiased, I'm proudly wearing my Tunu Rangatira Tanga badge here tonight. But so luckily I thought, what will I say? What will I say? My son is a diplomat. Ben, I said, what can I say nice about Shane Jones? And Ben's job is to be nice about our government. And unlike Phil Goff, he didn't get the message quite right there. So Ben said, Shane Jones, yes, I can see a problem, Dad. He said, but they love him on the Chatham Islands. He's big on the Chatham Islands. And Northland, there's not a pothole left in the whole of Northland. And there's not a bridge unbridged, a river unbridged in Northland. So they love him in the provinces. He's the man who planted how many million trees? So you've done some good things for our country, Shane. You're right. And you've done a very good thing tonight by agreeing to launch this book for Grant Hodson, our friend. So tēnā koe, kia kauri, tēnā koe, ngāti takuso.
In 1985, the then Ngāpuna Waihanga, a group of Māori writers, artists, people in the form of Hone Tūwhare, Hōtere, Hardy Williams, who's still alive, Rowley Habib, Whitty, and a variety of other men and women of that generation, gathered together at the Tūranga Waiwai Marae for the annual gathering of so said organisation. And Andrew Robb, who I'd been to university with, I know Rob sadly passed away, from an amateur writer and a journo in the Māori world, turned up there, and it was about that time that I met Roger. So it's fair to say that we've gone a few miles in different directions. So it's good to see you again. And well, you know, politics, it's like the Bible, there's a season for all things. Look, I'm turned 66 yesterday, but I had the good fortune to grow up with my grandmother and my mum and dad, but we lived in a wee house that had been built by my uncle when he came back from the Māori battalion of the First World War. And he had suffered an injury to his head, but he recovered. And the story is that when he went away, he'd gone to get a blessing at a certain spring not far from Awanui, north of Kaitaia. And the lady who was there doing the ceremony and doing the blessings, there was a bunch of them, she gave him a scarf. And she said, you'll strike a time where you're mortified with fear and you feel your life is about to be taken from you. Wrap this scarf around your head. So, being the First World War, there would be no shortage of those opportunities. Anyway, proceeded to wrap the scarf around his head, tried to put on his tin helmet, and some ordnance exploded, and his helmet was knocked off, and he woke up a long time later, and they had inserted a steel plate, very sort of primitive amateur type of surgery. And if it had not have been for that scarf rather absorbing parts of the steel shrapnel, he would not be alive today. So he came home and he was convinced he had a mission. This is the brother to my grandmother. And in those days in the north, there was a lot of superstitiousness in the Māori communities. And the church had a very big role to play. And that is the church that helped my uncle reintegrate back into the community, coming back, having survived the hell of the First World War. And a key figure of our church, the mihingare, as we say in Māori language, meaning the mission, and the Anglican Church in the area of Kaitaia and Awanui was the person that's referred to in here. The Māoris called him Te Paki. There were two missionaries in the very early 1830s who ventured north of the Bay of Islands, and one was Joseph Matthews and the other was Paki. And Paki, by dint of having been a young man surrounded by the Ngāpuhi, picked up the language, and they formed the mission that still had a strong narrative and effect on our upbringing, beyond my uncle, whose house we inherited right next to the marae. And when he came back in 1917, 18, 19, whatever it was, right down to me when I grew up, born in 1959. So when the opportunity came to stand next to Peter Hodgson's cousin, a Labour MP who's also a descendant of Paki, someone who I argued with all the time. Sadly, being a vet, he won most of the arguments. I had no hesitation in coming down from Auckland and standing with you to launch the book. But what I love about it is it tells a portion of New Zealand history where it's no longer in vogue. It's no longer faddish to talk about that period of our history that is before the treaty. And there's a richness to that portion of New Zealand's early faltering steps that has not fallen prey to ideology, that has not fallen prey to gallons of ink as we try to make sense of the post-treaty history. This tupuna, Paki, made a land yacht, and that is how he moved up the 90-mile beach, according to my grandmother, up the 90 Mile Beach when he would go and spread the gospel to the isolated Māori communities in that very narrow desert-like peninsula. And he's also the ancestor who went very early in his period of service to the spirit tree, Te Ako o Te Pōhutakawa, the Pōhutakawa tree at Te Rerenga Wairua. And this created some controversy amongst the kaumātua and the tupunas of that time. So bearing in mind, when he was a young man as a mission, these were men that would have been born around about the time when Cook got here in the 1770s. They were well into their 60s and 70s in the 1830s. And he was guided by the grandfather of a very famous preacher in the north called Reverend Māori Marsden. And his tupuna's name was Pairata, the pilot, because this man had bought the ships and the missionaries when they did try and navigate the Awanui River, which was just a shifting set of shoals. So fortunately, he did not cut the Pōhutakawa tree down, and he lived to tell the tale. But what I am trying to emphasize is, please don't deprecate that portion of our history. It may not be as well researched or recorded. It may not be subject to endless bouts of litigation, which is no doubt what Roger's referring to, my dislike of any more of it. But it is a rich tapestry. And I wonder often why people have shied away from it, because it's difficult to tell that story unless you view it through the lens of the missionaries, where I come from. And I've had no compunction ever associating myself with that story of the blend of those kaumātua and tupuna and the missionaries of the Anglican Church. That is what I am. That is how I got to go to St. Stephen's Māori Boys School in 1973. The conversation relates to Hongi Hika, the great musket, arguably the greatest chief of all of that time. Good. He predicted, however, when they asked him to be the first Māori king, and he said, "Takapu ki te kapua takuringa, hena nati, hena nati." I can deal with all my enemies and foe and disputatious relatives, but when I get back into the cup of my own hand, it will squeeze, which meant that he was never going to be able to be that leader who in peacetime could develop the level of authority over the people that he commanded in wartime. And then, as you know, he was part of this book, but he also fell to the musket, the very musket that he had brought back from England, wreaked terror on other tribes until they gained similar firepower. That's the musket that dispatched him to the spirit world. And at the back of this book, one of the chapters is an English version account of the discussions that the missionaries had with the men who were the leaders of that time about what was God, what were the rituals associated with battle, what were the differences in terms of their priorities in life to what the missionaries were trying to convey. And that's literally why I think this book will be valuable for a lot of people genuinely interested in the role of faith, mission, and the collision of two cultures and the inevitable blending that has made areas like Taitokero, where I come from, distinctive with its own culture. So that is why I have a great deal of pleasure. Did you have something to do with this book, did you, Roger? Did you say nothing? I would like, on your behalf, to formally, like launching a wee waka, launch this book on behalf of the family and the author and all of his supporters upon the current of readership, discourse, and enlightenment. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.